If you were to unroll a map of global power on a table, like a decade ago, you would probably be tracing military bases or shipping lanes and deep water ports.
Right, physical geography.
Exactly. Physical geography dictated your geopolitical leverage. But if you want to understand exactly where the borders of the future are being drawn today, July 17, 2026, you don't look at a topographic map.
No, you don't.
You look at the floor plan of a convention center in Shanghai.
Because the geography of power it's entirely migrated to technology infrastructure. And the epicenter of that migration is happening right now at the 2026 World Artificial Intelligence Conference.
Yep, WAIC, as it's known.
Mm-hmm.
And we are looking at just a massive convergence of events coming out of this conference. Our mission for this deep dive is to basically cut through the heavy geopolitical posturing and the dense tech specs to figure out what this actually means.
Yeah, to reverse engineer it.
Right. Because we're seeing two distinct forces colliding on the same stage here. You've got these mind-bending technological leaps in embodied AI.
Which are wild to look at.
Totally wild. And then on the other hand, a highly calculated, totally unprecedented diplomatic push by Chinese President Xi Jinping regarding, well, who gets to control the global governance of this technology.
Right.
We want to understand how these moves shift the global balance of power and ultimately how they dictate the tools that you, the listener, will have access to in your daily life.
Though before we start pulling this apart, we really should establish a clear framework for how we're approaching this material today.
Good point.
Because we are looking at some very heavy international maneuvering, specifically involving the intense tech friction between the U.S. and China.
Yeah, it's heated.
It does. So our goal here is not to pick a side or, validate any specific political rhetoric or pass judgment on the diplomatic strategies being deployed. We are strictly here to analyze the chessboard.
Just looking at the plays, not rooting for a team.
Exactly. We are impartially breaking down the mechanisms of the tech being debuted and the geopolitical strategies being leveraged by all the players involved.
Okay, so to understand the political plays, we first have to grasp the sheer physical reality of what they've built in Shanghai. I mean, the scale is difficult to overstate.
It's massive.
The conference is spread across three massive zones, the Expo, Zhanjiang, and West Bund, covering over 100,000 square meters.
Yeah, it's a small city.
Basically. There are over 1,100 companies exhibiting, and out of that, we are seeing more than 300 global product debuts. So let's unpack this. This isn't just a science fair. It's like the Olympics of AI.
It really is. It's the deployment phase of an entirely new industrial revolution. What stands out when you analyze the layout of those 300 debuts is the shift in computing architecture.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
We'll take the Huawei Atlas 950 supernode, for example, which is dominating a huge portion of the hardware discussion. We often hear about new microchips, right?
Always faster chips.
But a supernode is fundamentally different. When you are training the massive quote-unquote world models that run modern AI, a single chip is totally irrelevant. You need thousands of processors working simultaneously.
Wow, thousands.
Yeah, and the bottleneck usually isn't the chip itself. It's the interconnect bandwidth.
Like how fast they talk to each other.
Precisely. How fast those thousands of chips can share data without stalling.
Okay, so the innovation of the Atlas 950 isn't just raw processing speed, it's the clustering architecture. It's like the nervous system connecting the chips.
That's a great way to put it. It allows for processing petabytes of data with incredibly low latency, and that underlying hardware is what makes the software debuts possible.
Right, because you need the muscle to run the brain.
Exactly. We're seeing this massive transition from large language models, which, just predict the next word in a text box, to multimodal world models.
And the sources mention one called the Minimax M3.
Yeah, the Minimax M3. A world model like that doesn't just process text, it processes physics.
Wait, it processes physics?
Yeah, it understands spatial reasoning, object permanence, how physical materials interact. Oh, wow. Which explains the sudden explosion of humanoid robots and like those dexterous robotic hands we're seeing all over the exhibition floor.
Exactly.
Because if you have a software model that actually understands three-dimensional physics, you can finally take the AI out of the web browser and put it into a physical machine.
And we call that embodied AI. For the last 30 years, humans have had to translate our physical needs into digital inputs via, keyboards and screens.
Right, pointing and clicking.
Embodied AI flips that entirely. The machine can now perceive the physical environment and take autonomous action within it.
And that concept of autonomous action is what brings me to this buzzword that I keep catching in the exhibition notes, the token economy.
I see.
And this idea of one-person companies, like they debuted the world's first smartphone with an onboard AI agent, right? An AI that acts on the operating system level rather than just living inside an app.
Right, it sits above the apps.
So that agent can navigate your digital life. It can book a flight or negotiate a meeting. But how does that scale up to a one-person company? What does that actually mean for our listeners' future careers?
Well, this is where the token economy mechanism becomes critical. In an ecosystem of autonomous AI agents, these programs will need to transact with one another.
Okay.
If your overarching AI agent is tasked with building a software app for your one-person company, it might realize it lacks a specific data set, right?
Right.
In a token economy, your agent can autonomously negotiate with another company's AI agent, pay it a microtransaction using digital tokens, acquire the dataset, and compile the code.
All on its own.
All in fractions of a second without you ever clicking a button.
So a single human entrepreneur is essentially just a strategic visionary. You sit at the top, you provide the core directive, and an entire corporate hierarchy of specialized AI agents acts as your marketing department, your finance team, your developers.
Trading tokens with other machines to execute your vision.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That is wild.
It shrinks the execution gap between a human idea and massive corporate output to almost zero. But, I mean, the economic implications of millions of autonomous machine-to-machine transactions happening per second are profoundly disruptive.
Which feels like the exact moment we need to pivot to the friction underlying this entire event.
Yeah, we have to.
Because if you have autonomous networks of AI agents running one-person companies, making financial transactions, and dictating market movements in fractions of a second, you run the risk of breaking traditional economic structures.
Absolutely.
You can't just let that tech iterate in a vacuum. You need guardrails. And that brings us to the WAIC Academic Congress, which is running parallel to the corporate exhibition.
It's a fascinating addition to the event structure this year. They brought in 284 global submissions, and the Congress is chaired by Yao Kizi.
He's a Turing Award winner, right?
He is. And they've managed to convene over 1,400 international guests, including 9 Turing and Nobel laureates.
We are talking about figures like Yoshua Bengio and Richard Sutton, who basically built the foundational frameworks for reinforcement learning.
The absolute heavyweights.
But I have to push back on the reality of this gathering for a second.
Okay, go ahead.
You have the literal architects of modern AI sitting in conference rooms discussing ethics alongside UN officials. Meanwhile, a few hundred yards away, tech giants are racing to build and deploy these massive Atlas 950 clusters as fast as physically possible.
Right.
So isn't there a risk that this academic congress is just intellectual cover? Like an echo chamber that makes the event look responsible while the commercial side just accelerates without brakes?
It's a valid skepticism for sure. Historically, technology ethics boards have often functioned as mere PR.
Exactly. Window dressing.
But the presence of researchers like Sutton and Bengio in this specific geopolitical context suggests something more structural is happening. The academic literature they are debating at this Congress is heavily focused on the tension between mitigating catastrophic risk and maximizing open source innovation. Because governments do not actually know how to regulate a world model. Traditional regulatory frameworks move in years, but this technology iterates in weeks.
Yeah, you can't just pass a law saying, make the AI safe. You need actual mathematical protocols.
Exactly the point. The academics at this Congress are attempting to design the structural and mathematical guardrails, what they term secure and controllable AI, before these models reach total market saturation.
Okay.
Governments are relying on these academic heavyweights to write the baseline safety protocols that will eventually become state regulatory standards.
But consider the friction there. If you mandate that every AI model must be heavily secured, vetted, and controlled by state apparatuses to prevent catastrophic risks, you inadvertently crush the open source community.
Yes, you do.
The only entities capable of affording the compliance and compute costs for controllable AI would be massive tech monopolies.
And that is the core ethical and economic battleground of our time. The open source community argues that locking down AI models concentrates power in the hands of a few corporations or governments.
Right.
But the safety advocates argue that open sourcing a model capable of, say, generating novel pathogens or orchestrating massive cyber attacks is suicidal.
Wow. And this academic debate over who controls the technology and how accessible it should be acts as the perfect primer for the most unprecedented aspect of the 2026 WAIC.
The politics?
Yes. The academic friction sets the stage for a massive geopolitical pivot. Because the control of artificial intelligence is no longer just a theoretical debate for Turing laureates. It has become the primary lever of international statecraft.
It really has. And we saw this materialize directly in the opening address. For the first time in the history of the WAIC, Chinese President Xi Jinping delivered a roughly 20-minute keynote speech.
And the framing of that speech was highly, highly deliberate. The official theme centered on building a fair and equitable global AI governance system.
Right.
Xi heavily utilized phrases like a symphony of international cooperation and people-centered AI. But what stood out most prominently to me was his explicit opposition to what he called stretching the concept of national security to restrict technological development.
Yeah, and that phrase regarding national security is a direct, calculated response to the current geopolitical landscape.
Oh, absolutely.
Over the last few years, Western nations, led primarily by the United States, have implemented stringent export controls and semiconductor blockades.
Right.
The mechanism of those blockades relies heavily on invoking national security, basically arguing that advanced AI chips could be used for military modernization, and therefore they have to be restricted from certain foreign markets.
So if we reverse engineer the strategy here, here's where it gets really interesting. Xi is essentially using a tech conference to play diplomatic chess.
Very much so.
It's like setting up a rival regulatory body where the entry ticket is open cooperation rather than trade bans. He is standing on a global stage, looking directly at the global south and offering a counter-narrative.
Yes.
He's framing Western security restrictions as unfair gatekeeping and positioning China as the supplier of inclusive, cooperative tech growth.
It is a masterclass in utilizing soft power to achieve hard economic objectives. Much of the developing world, nations across Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia, they find themselves squeezed by the tech polarization between the U.S. and China.
They're caught in the middle.
Exactly. And they urgently need access to high-tier compute power and AI infrastructure to modernize their economies, manage their agriculture, build their digital grids.
Yeah, they don't want to be forced to choose sides in a technological Cold War.
No, nor do they want to be cut off from innovation just because they run afoul of Western export controls.
They just want the tools to build their economies. They want the supernodes and the AI agents we were just talking about.
And Xi Jinping is offering an alternative framework that guarantees access. By emphasizing fair and equitable governance, China is signaling to the global south that its technological ecosystem is open for integration. It's a strategic effort to set the global standards for AI governance by rallying non-Western nations around a shared infrastructure, effectively isolating the impact of Western sanctions.
But, diplomatic speeches are often just well-crafted theater.
Sure.
I mean, a symphony of cooperation sounds incredibly appealing in a convention hall, but unless it is backed by structural deliverables, it's just talk. It's just rhetoric until money and resources actually change hands.
It's true.
So are they actually establishing mechanisms to bypass the digital divide? Or is this just like signing memorandums of understanding for the cameras?
Oh, the deliverables introduced at this conference are highly concrete and deeply institutionalized. The central pillar of this diplomatic push is the launch of WAIC.
The World AI Cooperation Organization.
Yes.
It's a formalized institution right out of the gate, headquartered in Shanghai.
Exactly. And it launched with 29 founding member countries, pulling in major regional players like Brazil and Kazakhstan. This isn't just a loose alliance. They are building hard bureaucratic infrastructure. WAIC has already committed to providing 5,000 specific AI training opportunities for developing countries over the next 5 years.
Okay, that's real investment.
And they are actively establishing new permanent cooperation centers integrated directly with the African Union, the BRICS nations, and ASEAN.
That is massive institutional integration. You aren't just selling software at that point. You are training the next generation of engineers in the global south on your specific technological standard.
Exactly.
But the deliverable that really caught my attention as a strategic masterstroke was the technology transfer regarding the weather system.
Ah, the MAZU system.
Yes, they are granting 30 developing countries direct access to this advanced AI weather alert and forecasting system. And on the surface, providing a climate prediction tool looks like a straightforward humanitarian effort, right? A public good.
Right, looks great on paper.
But if you look at the mechanism of how AI infrastructure actually works, there's a much deeper layer of lock-in happening here.
Yes. And this is where we see the concept of infrastructure diplomacy evolving. In the 20th century, Infrastructure diplomacy meant funding a highway or building a hydroelectric dam in a developing nation.
Physical concrete.
Right. Today, it means building the digital nervous system of a country.
Because if you give a developing nation access to the MEZU system, their agricultural sector, their emergency response logistics, their aviation networks, all of it begins to optimize around that specific AI model.
They train their local data on it.
Yeah, their national APIs are integrated into it.
Mhm.
Once your entire food security apparatus is reliant on WAICO data formats and Chinese server architecture, you cannot simply unplug and switch over to a Silicon Valley cloud provider if the political winds change.
No, you can't.
It is far too deeply embedded.
And that is the profound realization coming out of WAIC 2026. AI is not just a commercial product. I mean, it is foundational infrastructure.
Right.
Whichever bloc provides the most reliable, accessible, and integrated AI infrastructure to the developing world will ultimately dictate the operating standards for the global digital economy.
Wow.
If WAIPO succeeds in standardizing the AI frameworks across the global south, Western tech companies may find themselves largely locked out of emerging markets. And not by tariffs, but by simple technological incompatibility.
Which raises an incredibly daunting question, I think, for you, the listener. If we have Western nations fortifying their technological borders through expert controls and security guardrails, while WAIC rapidly builds a massive open access coalition across the global south.
Yeah.
So what does this all mean for the global digital divide? Are we accelerating toward a fractured internet? Like, are we looking at a future with two entirely separate, siloed AI ecosystems that literally cannot communicate with one another?
The risk of a fractured global standard is the exact crisis the academic and diplomatic communities are failing to reconcile right now. If you have two competing ecosystems, one Western, one WAICO-led, training their foundational world models on completely different data sets,
Right.
optimized for different cultural values, and governed by conflicting ethical protocols, you don't just get a divided internet. You get two divergent digital realities.
And navigating that divide will dictate everything from how international banking operates to how your personal AI agent interacts with foreign markets. We started this deep dive talking about how a map of the future is drawn inside a convention center.
Yeah.
What the 2026 WAIC proves is that AI is no longer just a technological frontier. It is the new currency of global power. The borders of the 21st century aren't going to be drawn with physical walls. They're being written in code, protocol standards, and computing clusters.
Absolutely.
And the outcome of this geopolitical maneuvering will determine the rules of the networks you rely on every single day. The tools available in your workplace, the global economy you participate in. The direction of AI really depends on collective human decisions, not just the code itself.
And, analyzing the massive physical computing clusters required to run this divided future leads to a final, very urgent thought that wasn't heavily featured in the diplomatic speeches, but is critical for us to consider.
Okay, what's that?
Well, we discussed the incredible capabilities of the Huawei Atlas 950 and the sheer density of computing power required to train these physical world models.
Right. The thousands of processors.
This technology requires an astronomical, almost unfathomable amount of electricity and water for cooling.
Oh, wow. Yeah, the energy footprint to run billions of autonomous AI agents in a token economy is staggering.
It is. So consider the implications of a fractured global AI ecosystem. If the international community fails to converge on shared standards and instead splits into competing geopolitical blocs, we are going to see the West and the WAICO alliance each racing to build their own massive, completely redundant AI infrastructure.
Oh, man. They'll duplicate server farms.
Duplicate supernodes, duplicate energy grids, just to serve their respective allies and maintain technological sovereignty.
Right.
If we are entering an era of a divided, hyper-competitive AI arms race, who is going to govern the devastating environmental costs of powering two separate futures?
That is a chilling realization. We might end up doubling the carbon footprint of the digital age simply to ensure our systems don't have to talk to each other.
Exactly.
The map of the future is certainly getting more complex and significantly hotter by the minute. Thank you for joining us on this exploration today. Keep questioning the systems you interact with, look for the mechanisms beneath the buzzwords, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.